Russian ballistic missiles slammed into a bustling city center in northeastern Ukraine on Sunday morning. Ukrainian officials say it's killed at least 34 people in what appeared to be the deadliest attack against civilians this year. The morning strike on the city of Sumy was the latest in a string of intensifying Russian attacks on urban centers in Ukraine. There's been a step up of major attacks that have inflicted heavy civilian casualties despite the Trump administration pushing for a ceasefire. Officials said that the city center was crowded with civilians who were out enjoying Palm Sunday, which is a traditional Christian celebration very popular in Ukraine. Lively streets were turned into scenes of carnage. Videos of the aftermath showed mangled and bloodied bodies lying on the ground. There were burning cars and debris covering the road, even as screams and sirens wailed in the air. 2 children were among the dead and more than 100 people were wounded, according to Ukraine's emergency services. The Russian strikes came just over a week after another Russian missile had hit a playground in the central city of Kryvyi Rih, killing at least 19 people, and that included 9 children. In that attack, as well as in the one in Sumy, Russia used ballistic missiles which travel at very high speeds, making them extremely difficult to shoot down. Overall, civilian deaths in Ukraine have increased since the US-mediated ceasefire talks began in March. The United Nations said last week that more than 160 civilians were killed in Ukraine in the past month. That's a 50% increase from February and 70% more than the same period last year. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, who has accused Russia of using the ceasefire to stall for time, said the attack on Sumy showed that Moscow really has no interest in a ceasefire, despite the Trump administration and its efforts to try and broker a peace.
Війни закінчуються, коли про злочини війни не забувають. І коли на агресора тиснуть достатньо. Саме цього зараз немає. Цієї п'ятниці був рівно місяць, як Росія відкинула американську пропозицію повного і безумовного припинення вогню. Вони не бояться, і саме тому балістика. Саме тому щоночі під сотню ударних дронів, більшість з яких шахеди.
Both Russia and Ukraine have pledged to halt attacks on each other's energy infrastructure. They're also trying to cut a Black Sea deal, but none of this has come into effect just yet. Russia, meanwhile, has rejected a full unconditional 30-day ceasefire, which Ukraine had accepted at the behest of Donald Trump. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha has said that Russia has escalated attacks on civilian areas since the ceasefire talks began last month in Saudi Arabia. Ukraine's European allies have echoed similar sentiments, saying that this appears to be a coordinated response by Russia to try and derail the ceasefire talks. President Emmanuel Macron of France said on social media, and I quote, "Everyone knows that this war was initiated by Russia alone, and today it is clear that Russia alone chooses to continue with it with blatant disregard for human lives, international law, and the diplomatic efforts of President Trump." There was no immediate comment from Russia's military about the attack on Sumy, which is located just 20 miles from the Russian border. Before the war began, Sumy was home to about 250,000 people. Since the war, it has become a refuge for Ukrainian civilians who are fleeing villages and towns along the Russian border in a bid to escape the bombardment. Sumy and its surrounding regions have also regularly come under Russian attack over the past year, particularly since Ukraine used the area as a base for a cross-border offensive into Russia's neighboring region of Kursk. Moscow's forces pushed most Ukrainian troops out of Kursk earlier this year, but Kiev has warned that Russia is now preparing to push into the Sumy region and thereby open a new front in this war. So what's the game plan here? It's not immediately clear why Vladimir Putin is not agreeing to the America-brokered ceasefire with Ukraine, even at the cost of angering Trump. Here are some possible explanations. Putin aims to seize as much Ukrainian territory as possible to strengthen Russia's negotiating position. Control over regions like Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, which are partially occupied since 2022, is seen as critical for the future of peace talks. By expanding Russia's territorial holdings, Putin is seeking to force Ukraine into accepting facts on the ground and thereby legitimizing Russia's claims. Putin's long-term goal, though, is not just control of these 4 provinces. He wants to extinguish the idea of Ukrainian nationhood. He views Ukraine as historically a part of Russia. A ceasefire, a temporary one, would allow Ukraine to regroup, rearm, and fortify its defenses, something that is incompatible with Putin's objective, which is to subjugate Kiev. Demands for Ukraine's demilitarization, its complete exclusion from NATO, are non-negotiable for Putin to even agree to come to the negotiating table. Russia's recent gains in the Kursk region are viewed as a strategic victory. Putin believes expelling Ukrainian forces from Kursk would deprive Kiev of a key bargaining chip. It also allows Moscow to demand permanent annexation of the occupied territories in exchange for a ceasefire.
When you start a war, you got to know that you can win the war, right? You don't start a war against somebody that's 20 times your size and then hope that people give you some missiles.
Not just that, Ukrainian air defense interception rates have dropped to 50%, partly because of Russia's shift to larger, more sophisticated missiles. By overwhelming Ukraine's defenses, Putin hopes to cripple it on the battlefield. A 30-day ceasefire, as proposed by America, would grant Ukraine time to regroup. Putin has explicitly rejected this. He fears that a ceasefire, a temporary one, would enable Kiev to fortify the front lines and plan a counteroffensive. While Trump, on the other hand, seeks a swift resolution, he wants an immediate ceasefire, Putin is exploiting this urgency by prolonging negotiations and by attaching maximalist conditions. By feigning a limited interest in peace, Putin avoids directly antagonizing Trump, while at the same time advancing his goal, which is to crush Ukrainian nationhood. Putin likely calculates that Trump has a transactional approach, he also has very limited attention span, and his skepticism of NATO will shield Russia from any further repercussions. Putin's strategy hinges on outlasting Donald Trump's resolve and Western unity, at the same time eroding Ukraine's capacity to fight. And right now, it is Putin who seems to be succeeding.